I'm Zach, and I am an alcoholic. To qualify, my sobriety date is September 28th, 2018. I can't say that I have one particular home group, but I do have a multitude. And I think that's important to bring up because I think each one adds a different piece to my recovery network. I have a men's meeting that takes place in a recovery center, and I feel like, the purpose is that it allows, some filters to be removed and allows some more freedom for sharing, but also it being in a recovery network, I think it helps to keep fresh the facts as in the book, right? They don't hold AA and like the 12 steps don't hold the monopoly on recovery. And while like I found great solace, like there's other pieces and aspects that I found are like tips and tricks that I've kind of added to my bag of tools that I can utilize over the years. And then the majority of my other meetings kind of center around the literature. I have one big book meeting, one's a big book workshop meeting, and then another one I was at tonight with the sponsees, 12 and 12. So that I found that speaker discussions like are helpful. I found that very early in sobriety, I was graced with the benefit of having a meeting that worked with my third shift schedule and just got me right into the literature and got me repetitions and hearing it over and over and over again and allowing it, while I was, my head was clearing up to hear the words said enough times where I could let them marinate inside and like seek out and like come to understand the deeper meaning, right? Because the big book at face value is kind of difficult at times, right? Because it's daily language. When you dive a little bit deeper underneath the surface, you realize that there's this commonality that Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob and, him sitting down with E.B. Thatcher was monumental, and like they realized they were onto something, and the fact that they were onto something was a solution. Then got backed by other individuals in the medical field that applauded them. I'd be foolish not to encourage these individuals because we've been trying to solve this problem for a long time, and like nothing we've done has worked. But they've done something, and I've seen guys come in that were utterly hopeless and were gonna either end up in an asylum, end up in a ditch somewhere, end up dead, not, needing to lean on alcohol as a crutch to get by in their daily lives, both physically, mentally, and spiritually. But they're out productive members of society and their spirits are high and like they're changing the world one individual at a time. After being exposed to that, getting pairing like up with a sponsor, like I got to work. And there was a whole slew of God shots that came into my life really early on. From one of the first meetings I went to, a gentleman approached me who part of anonymity, like I'll leave his name out of it. This is a kid I went to high school with who not only remembered my name, but when I said, I don't have a car to drive anywhere, he said, that's fine. Here, take my number. I go to 7 meetings a week. You'll go with me. And, I was off and running. And then when I got my freedom back and did the time, the necessary steps to get my license back, continue to work the program, right? Like took it upon myself to take some ownership of my own sobriety and end up going to meetings where I walked away feeling like I was, learning, was pulling something from it because there was some that I enjoyed. It was repetitive and I was seeking more, I was hungry. And I got into working the steps. My first sponsor pointed out to me that first step that, I'm powerless over alcohol. But then he also pointed out to me the importance of that M clause, the fact that it's a two-part scenario because I can admit that I'm powerless over it, but if I think my life is fine, I'm not going to do anything about it. And if my life's unmanageable, but I don't know the root cause, I'm just spinning my tires and nothing's going to change. I've come to understand it as it's an if and then statement. And by that, I mean, if I admit that I'm powerless over alcohol and my life has become unmanageable, then I'm given the gift of desperation and I'm willing to do something about it. And then I'm seeking out something bigger than myself. It doesn't matter really what it is. It's just because I got hung up that big, scary God word a long time ago. But I realized, much like Bill's story where he recounts he's sitting with EB and he talks about how his grandfather, he never attested the fact the bells had music to play, right? Like there was something bigger than himself. He was hesitant against, somebody telling him exactly how to listen. I got hung up on that. I didn't want to not believe that something bigger was out there. I felt like it needed to, but I didn't understand that second important part that it comes to say also in the big book, like faith without works is dead. I just chose something and I kind of ran with it. And then, I came to believe that whatever that bigger thing for me was, it was for me, and it still kind of is, was my grandfather who had left us, unfortunately, when I was 13. And I latched onto that because, like, in my mind, like that was the lens from which I defined, what it meant to be a good man, like a good citizen. He never raised his voice, he never yelled, he cared about his family. Everything he did was done, out of kindness and just was very deliberate and soft spoken. I ran with that and I did the work, did a fourth step, did a fifth step, worked through a six and seven. And then you got to about eight or nine, and then the pandemic hit. And I think before that, like first sponsor, like we were growing apart and then like the pandemic hit, I think I skated along through that. Part of the reason like what helped me not drink was that I was working for Amazon. So I had to go to work every day. And like I had to get up in the morning, I had to go. And like I spoke on some Zoom commitments, but for me, like a lot of like speaker tapes and like just listening to it, I thoroughly struggled throughout that. And I think having not put together the time that I did before that, I don't know if I would have gotten through it. But coming out of the pandemic, I had the wherewithal to approach an older gentleman at a meeting that I had frequented when I was younger. And I remember walking up to him and just being very plain about it and saying, look, here's where I'm at. I've got about 3 years. Physically, I don't have cravings. Emotionally slash mentally, give or take a day or two, because mental illness is part of my picture. I'm struggling, but what I'm looking to further is my spiritual condition. And that's where I'm lacking. You have a faith. That's something I wanted. Like he talked in just the way he carried himself, talked about his faith, and it was a very gentle and had a very deep faith and like belief in God, and like it wasn't overpowering, and he wasn't trying to shove it in anybody's face. It was just something he'd experienced and grown through the program. And it just so happened that when I approached him, he had just finished reading with another gentleman, so he had room to start sponsoring me. He was also starting an AWOL, and he said, "Do you want to be a part of it?" And I said, "Absolutely, yes." So, I'm reading with him and I'm going through this AWOL. And the funny thing that happened was my faith grew exponentially. And it was just from sitting down with him. It was just from asking questions and being involved and being engrossed. And like I found that the more time that's passed, the changes aren't necessarily so drastic, but they're a culmination of little slight shifts. And the irony of it too is that my faith became rocketed from the variety of books I'm reading. And one was the Dan Brown series, the last book, when it's this guy that identifies as an atheist and like the law of conservation of matter. And I started to look to it, if the earth and the winds change direction all the time and like the earth can like establish homeostasis, that's a non-tangible energy that I wrap my head around. From there, I kind of said, well, maybe the spirit isn't like the same thing, right? Because they talk about in the book that God is love, God is all these other things. Like, people talk about, I can feel his presence. But when I opened my eyes to that, that was the beginning of my journey to really thoroughly let a higher power into my life. And I find through, saying the serenity prayer or the fourth or fifth step prayer where it says, we ask God to remove our fear and direct us towards what our next object should be. That once we began to outgrow fear, I found that opportunities to practice these principles in my life have become very apparent. And when I've let go and let God, doesn't mean, shirking my daily duties. He's not going to show up to work for me. He's not going to pay my bills for me. But what he will do is he will give me opportunities in my life to put my money where my mouth is, walk the talk, walk the walk, whereas like I previously would just talk the talk. And if I seize these opportunities, and I have the faith that if when I seize them, everything's going to be okay, it's paid off in dividends. And the result is today that, I'm working with two different gentlemen, taking them through the book, and they're both at different points. And they both came to me when, one was kind of at a transition point, is, slowly starting to write his fourth step. And the other one were just starting, and it worked, and like things just kind of flow. And I found the more and more that I take the time to pray, because I don't do it every day. And I do it sometimes on the way to work. I try to do it at the end of the day, but sometimes it's just a simple thank you. Sometimes it's deeper than that, and sometimes it's a list of names of people in my past. I add to my prayer list, and new ones get subbed in like when I remember them. But the point is that I do it consistently, and I find that whether it's driving to work, I can say a prayer, or intermittent moments at work where I can stop and I can pause and I can just breathe for a second. It helps me to pull back from myself and recognize, hey, maybe that doesn't seem like it made any sense for that person to react that way, but let me put myself in their shoes. Like, let me make space for that person, and at the same time, let me make space for that person, but also be aware of boundaries that I have. Because I think it was funny. A guy brought up at a meeting I was at previously, and he was like, what is AA doing for you, and what are you doing for AA? And one of the things that I said that I think is super important, it took me a long time to learn, and like this fellowship has helped me learn that, like, one of the things I'm doing for the fellowship and like also doing for myself is realizing that I have the ability to say no, and recognizing where my limitations are, and recognizing when like I'm sponsoring two individuals and like my plate is kind of full in that regard. And I only say that because my wisdom from a previous sponsor, in trying to take on too much, you end up doing a disservice to everybody involved, including myself, because like I have to keep my own mental health, my own well-being in check. That's part of my recovery program too. So while I go to a lot of meetings, some days, my recovery looks like going home early and doing the laundry and like taking up the trash, changing my sheets, going to bed early, because like that's just as important as getting to a meeting. And there's virtual meetings and things like that. So I kind of mix and match, because the core of my recovery is, that Tuesday men's meeting and the Wednesday big book and the big book workshop. I'm also working with people, so I try and just keep it balanced, because it's really all about balance. To stem off like the AWOL idea, right? It's a way of life, because at the end of the day, the point of this program is I can have a center that's recovery, but it allows me to go out and be a productive member of society. And I'm able to like go out and experience life, carry this message. And today I just try and, I try and remain curious and not judgmental. And I try and be aware of where I might be at fault. And I'm able to recognize those when they happen. 10 step, that daily reflection, that's a culmination of doing that 4 and 5. And I've since done a second 4 and 5. The crazy thing was the second time I did it, I got hung up, not because I was struggling to write it, but because I wrote it out. I didn't think it was long enough. And so therefore it couldn't be thorough. But then I sat down with my current sponsor. He said, well, it was thorough, but that's still the alcoholic thinking that, oh, it has to be this long drawn out thing. But in reality, I did a previous 4th step and I've been working a program. So it makes perfect sense that the second list is going to be short. I still have amends to make, but some of them are a combination of a sit down amends, but a living amends. Whereas I try and always continue to be in a place where I can learn, where I'm open to new ideas, where I'm constantly seeking new connections and new ways to phrase stuff. And the more time I've spent in the book, the more that it's uncovered and ways to talk about the 3rd step that's inviting to more and more people, because I firmly believe that that's part of carrying the message. I can carry this great message that's full of all this meaning, but if the person I'm trying to carry it to, it lands on deaf ears, in my mind, I'm not thoroughly doing my job. And also it keeps, my brain involved where I'm excited about the process, coming up with new acronyms for, God, whether it's just a greater object of designation or it's your gateway out of destruction or your higher power, the holder of my problems until, I'm able to solve them and to give the ones that I can't solve to somebody else to free up space in my head to be a better service. So today I'm able to be accountable for stuff. And today you can honestly truly say that I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful that I have ADD. I'm grateful that depression was part of my story because it's come to shape me the person that I am today. The program saved my life. It gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. But more importantly, it made me want to and able to show up to life on life's terms. Because it's not always easy. Like even they never say it's easy. They say it's simple, but it's not easy. In life on life's terms, people pass away. You lose people. You struggle. There's some people you try and help and they just fall off. By remaining, humble and seeking that serenity, I'm able to sit back and go, like I did what I can and I tried. At the end of the day, I can't make somebody else willing. I can't show up for somebody. And I try and always remember what my current sponsor said. God and my higher power didn't ask me to save the world. He just asked me to help the next person that comes across my path. That's what I try to do and help the next person. I found that when you do the next right thing, the next right thing happens. And I'm still learning. I find that I'm learning more now and I'm more engrossed in it now than I think I was when I was newly sober. And I think that's partly because my eyes are so open and I'm looking for those opportunities that God throws at me to grow. And I'm looking for those teachable moments, but I'm also looking for those lessons where I can grow as a person, better carry the message. And I'm forever grateful and forever indebted to the fellowship. And that's all I got. Thank you.